What if a prophet running from God, an apostle sailing to his destiny, and a son who blew his inheritance all ended up in the same boat? It sounds impossible, right? A story stitched together from different times and tales. Now, you won't find this story in a single chapter of Scripture, but its threads are woven all through the Bible, connecting three of its most iconic worlds. This is an imagined story, an allegory, that explores how the threads of flight, faith, and forgiveness can create one powerful narrative. And it all starts with a man who thought he could outrun God. Section 1. The Flight of the Prophet. His name was Jonah, and he was a prophet of God. But right now, huddled in the damp, dark hold of a cargo ship, he felt more like a fugitive. He'd paid the fare, no questions asked, looking for a ticket to the furthest corner of the known world. Anywhere but Nineveh. Nineveh, the name itself tasted like ash. A city of brutal, wicked people, God's enemies. And God wanted him to go there and offer them mercy? It felt like an outrage, a betrayal. You see, Jonah wasn't just running from a place, he was running from a principle. He was running from a grace so wide it terrified him, a mercy so vast it felt like a personal injustice. So he fled. He bought a ticket on a ship sailing west, while his calling lay to the east. He went down into the belly of the ship, a perfect reflection of the darkness in his own heart, and tried to sleep. Here he was, a prophet in rebellion, a man of God at war with God's own heart. He was a prodigal prophet, running from the home of his divine mission, convinced his sense of justice was better than his Creator's. As the ship pulled away from the port of Joppa, a tiny sliver of relief cut through his anger. Every creak of the timber, every splash of the waves, was a sound carrying him further from his unwanted duty. He actually believed that distance could sever his connection to the Almighty. He thought he could find a corner of the world where God's inconvenient compassion couldn't find him. Exhausted by his own fury, he drifted into a troubled sleep, totally unaware of the other passenger of destiny sailing these same waters under a very different command. Section 2. The Storm of the Apostle. The storm didn't arrive gently. It descended like a predator, turning the sea into a churning cauldron of black water and shrieking wind. The ship groaned, its timbers screaming under the strain. Jonah was jolted awake, not just by the storm, but by that familiar cold dread coiling in his stomach. This was it, the hand of God reaching for him across the waves. He'd been here before. He knew how this story ended, with sailors casting lots, a confession, and a plunge into the abyss. He was a curse on this ship, just as he had been on the first one. He braced himself for the confrontation. But as he prepared for the shouts of panicked sailors, he heard something else. A different sound cutting through the howl of the wind. A voice, calm, resolute, assured. He stumbled out of the hold and crept toward the main deck, squinting against the spray. There, in the middle of the chaos, stood a figure. A prisoner, bound in chains, yet he spoke with an authority that defied his situation. This was the Apostle Paul. Hidden in the shadows, Jonah watched as Paul addressed the terrified crew. "Sirs," Paul called out, his voice steady, "I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. God has granted you all those who sail with you.'" Jonah was stunned, a storm at sea, a man of God, a divine message. It was a mirror of his own story, but the reflection was warped, showing him everything he wasn't. Where Jonah had slept in defiance, Paul stood awake in faith. Where Jonah's presence brought a death sentence, Paul's presence brought a promise of life. Jonah had seen God's power as something to run from. Paul saw it as something to trust in. Then, Paul did something that shattered Jonah's world. He took bread, and in front of everyone, he gave thanks to God. He broke it and began to eat. In the heart of a hurricane, facing a certain shipwreck, this man was holding a fellowship meal. His faith wasn't a desperate plea, it was a confident assurance. And in that moment, Jonah, the prophet of God, saw in Paul, the prisoner of Rome, the prophet he was always supposed to be. The storm was the same, but the man was different. For the first time, Jonah didn't see the storm as God's anger, but as God's classroom. Section 3. The Shore of the Sun. The ship splintered, just as Paul had predicted. They all swam for shore, clinging to whatever planks they could find. Jonah washed up on a sandy beach, gasping, but alive. He'd survived the storm, not in the belly of a fish, but by following the lead of a chained apostle whose faith was stronger than any timber. As he and Paul staggered inland, a foul smell hit them. They followed it to a muddy pigsty, and there they saw him. A young man, barely more than a boy, kneeling in the filth. His clothes were rags, his face was a mask of hunger and shame, and he was staring at the pig's slop with desperate longing. He was the picture of utter ruin. This wasn't a historical figure Jonah or Paul would have known. He was a character from a parable Jesus would tell centuries after Jonah, a story Paul himself would have taught. He was the prodigal son, a living, breathing embodiment of rebellion and regret, brought to life on this allegorical shore. Jonah looked at the boy and saw Nineveh. He saw the filth, the sin, the uncleanliness he despised. He saw the very kind of person he believed should never receive God's forgiveness. His old anger, that familiar self-righteousness, began to bubble up. But then Paul stepped forward. He didn't look at the boy with disgust. He looked at him with a deep, aching compassion. "Son," he said gently, his voice free of judgment, "I once heard a story from my Lord. It was about a son who left his father and wasted everything he had. He ended up right where you are now." The young man looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. Paul went on, "I was a long way from home once, too. I was a persecutor, an enemy of the very God I now serve. I was a prodigal of a different sort, lost in my own pride. But grace found me. The Father's love isn't a shallow pond, it's an endless ocean. And it's waiting for you, too." Hearing those words, something in Jonah finally broke. He saw it all woven together. He saw himself in the rebellious son, wasting the divine inheritance of his calling. He saw Paul, a man who, like Nineveh, had been an enemy of God but was now a champion of his grace. He saw the boy in the mud, not as an object of God's questionable mercy, but as a mirror of his own lostness. The anger that had fueled his escape collapsed under the weight of a grace he finally, truly understood. This is what he had been running from. A love willing to kneel in the mud to bring its children home. Conclusion. In the grand story of the Bible, God is the master weaver. He weaves lives together through divine providence, often in ways we can't fully grasp. This imagined encounter simply pulls 3 threads from different parts of that tapestry into a single frame. You have a prophet running from a mission of grace, an apostle running toward a destiny of grace, even in chains, and a son who, after running away, finally found the courage to run home to grace. Jonah, Paul, and the prodigal son never met on a literal shoreline. They're separated by centuries and circumstance. One isn't even a historical person but a character in a parable. But their stories are eternally woven together by a single, divine theme. Whether you feel like you're running from a mission, a family, or your own past, the journey back to forgiveness always begins with a single step of faith. This one story of flight, faith, and forgiveness connects these 3 biblical worlds and shows us a profound truth. No one is ever too lost to be found. CTA. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more creative biblical narratives where we explore the powerful connections woven throughout Scripture. And let us know in the comments, which of these 3 stories speaks to you the most? Jonah's flight, Paul's faith, or the son's return? We'd love to hear your thoughts.